It's an amazingly warm week here in Wisconsin. We have mid 50s and it's very very nice outside. Um, for Thanksgiving, we may be getting mid 50s or high 50s. It's pretty amazing stuff. So um, on this, I wanted to concentrate on a concept called intelligent design on this video. ID as it's called, and it really is if you read about it, it's really a form of creationism. Um, Intelligent design, according to the encyclopedia, is promulgated by the Discovery Institute. The Institute defines it as the proposition that certain features of the universe and of living things are best explained by an intelligent cause, not an undirected process such as natural selection. It is a contemporary adaptation of the traditional teleological argument for the existence of God, presented by its advocates as an evidence-based scientific theory about life's origins rather than a religious-based idea. So the leading proponents of intelligent design are associated with the Discovery Institute, a politically conservative think tank. Kind of interesting there. ID seeks to redefine science in a fundamental way that would invoke supernatural explanations, an approach its proponents describe as theistic realism or theistic science. It's kind of interesting thinking about something called theistic science. It's just not, doesn't make sense. It's like saying hot cold. There's just no it doesn't make a lot of sense. So to say it's either theistic or science, it's one of the two, right? Intelligent design was developed apparently by a group of American creationists who revised their argument in the creation-evolution controversy to circumvent court rulings such as the United States Supreme Court Edwards versus Aguiar ruling, which barred the teaching of creation science in public schools as breaching the separation of church and state. The first publication of the phrase intelligent design in its present use as an alternative term for creationism was of Pandas and People, a 1989 textbook intended for high school biology classes. From the 1990s, intelligent design proponents were supported by the Discovery Institute, which together with its Center for Science and Culture planned and funded the intelligent design movement. They advocated inclusion of intelligent design in school biology curricula. So that's where they went way overboard, trying to fit it into science. Now, you can just go into a corner and pray and be a religion class. That's fine. But once you start messing with calling it a science, that's when you get real trouble. So that's not good. So this is very interesting when you really look at this concept, how false it really is. It's a false. It's politically motivated. It's all the wrong things, really. The teleological argument, also known as the design argument, is one of three basic religious arguments for the existence of God, which has been advanced for centuries. In the 13th century, Thomas Aquinas argued that natural things act to achieve the best result, as they cannot do this without intelligence. An intelligent being must exist, setting the goal and providing direction. And this being is God. The version formulated in 1802 by the theologian William Paley used the watchmaker analogy to argue that complexity and adaptation in nature demonstrated God's benevolence and perfect design, for the good of human beings, of course. And this is somewhat egocentric too, to think that humans are favored over everything in the world. That when you look at that objectively, we have a blue dot, a pale blue dot, a point in light called the Earth, or point, I should say, a speck of dust in the Earth, that is the Earth in the universe, that is. And so that it doesn't make a lot of sense to say, yep, human beings are favored by the God Almighty when we don't know what we're talking about. We have to know what we're talking about. Now, Paley's natural theology strongly influenced scientists of the time, including Charles Darwin, It began with the assumption that God had designed nature and were open to a deistic interpretation, that this design was implemented by laws. While Darwin's natural selection explained complexity and adaptation without the need for a designer, he was still inclined to think that everything resulted from designed laws by which nature's God shaped life. Intelligent design has Paley's religious argument from design as its center. But unlike Paley's openness to deistic design through God-given laws, the point of intelligent design is to seek scientific confirmation of repeated miraculous interventions in the history of life. By 1910, evolution was not a topic of major religious controversy in America, but in the 1920s, fundamentalist Christianity engaged in the fundamentalist modernist controversy took up opposition to evolution. This was 1910. They effectively suspended teaching of evolution in U.S. public schools. In the 1960s, after evolution was reintroduced into the curriculum, young Earth creationists promoted creation science as an alternative scientific explanation of the world in which we live. Again, they're talking about science, which frequently invoked the design argument to explain complexity in nature. These explanations prefigured the intelligent arguments of irreducible complexity, even featuring the bacterial flagellum. Attempts to introduce this in schools led to court rulings that creation science is religious in nature and thus cannot be taught in public school science classrooms. Philosopher Barbara Forrest writes that the intelligent design movement began in 1984 with the publication of John Buell's The Foundation for Thought and Ethics. In March of 1986, a review by Meyer used information theory to suggest that messages transmitted by DNA in the cell show specified complexity, specified by intelligence, and must have originated with some kind of intelligent agent. So there has to be, if it's this, they're saying, so basically, if it's this complicated, there has to be something more. There has to be this intelligent agent. There has to be this higher being that's creating all the rest of it. That this is just what they assume. This is what is assumed. This is, if you're in one of these classrooms, I suppose you're just told this is what to assume. You assume this. This is to get to pass this class. You have to assume it. So you have no choice. Intelligent design avoids identifying or naming the intelligent designer. It merely states that one must exist, but leaders of the movement have said that the designer is the Christian God, so that not only are humans favored in the universe, but guess what? The designer is the Christian God. Irreducible complexity, which is something that I can get into much further later, because it is probably the most interesting thing. This is the heart of intelligent design, really. Irreducible complexity is the heart of why they're saying this, is that it's so complicated we just want to stop thinking, and gosh, this reasoning is really hard work on my brain. I just need to stop now. Stop. It's like when your wife tells you to stop arguing. I just don't want to argue now. And I hope I don't do that too much to my wife, but sometimes I want to settle the point logically, and I come to a stop. There's a stopping point. I have to take a time out. Well, it's somewhat analogous to this term of irreducible complexity. It was introduced by biochemist Michael Behe in the 1996 book Darwin's Black Box. I have a friend in Milwaukee who's very, very conservative, on the right part of the spectrum, and also is totally in agreement with Michael Behe that because things are so complex, we should stop thinking. I don't think we should stop thinking, really. Behe defines it as a single system which is composed of several well-matched interacting parts that contribute to the basic function, wherein the removal of any one of the parts causes the system to effectively cease functioning. Behe uses the analogy of a mousetrap to illustrate this concept. A mousetrap consists of several interacting pieces: the base, the catch, the spring, and the hammer, all of which must be in place for the mousetrap to work. Removal of any one piece destroys the function of the mousetrap. Intelligent design advocates assert that natural selection could not create irreducible complex systems because the selectable function is present only when all parts are assembled. Behe argued that irreducible complex biological mechanisms include bacterial flagellum, the blood clotting cascade cilia, and the adaptive immune system. Critics point out the irreducible complexity argument assumes that the necessary parts of a system have always been necessary and therefore could not have been added sequentially. They argue that something that is at first merely advantageous can later become necessary as other components change. Furthermore, they argue evolution often proceeds by altering pre-existing parts or by removing them from a system rather than by adding them. This is sometimes called the scaffolding objection by an analogy with scaffolding, which can support an irreducible complex building until it is complete and able to stand on its own. Behe has acknowledged using sloppy prose and that his argument against Darwinism does not add up to a logical proof. Irreducible complexity has remained a popular argument among advocates of intelligent design. In the Dover trial, the court held that Professor Behe's claim for irreducible complexity has been refuted in peer-reviewed research papers and has been rejected by the scientific community at large. So this whole term of this irreducible complexity, there's also a wiki page just on irreducible complexity. So this is, I think, in my opinion, this is the heart and soul of the ID movement, is irreducible complexity. And once you can show sufficient doubt about irreducible complexity, then we're well on our way to forcing the quote-unquote believers into a new paradigm that they have to face.